All right, I'm going to go ahead and welcome our panelists onto the stage for kind of a deep dive into the ag economy and some research that we have not unveiled, some survey results that we have not unveiled until today. So you are getting a first look, and we saved it just for this. So we have Grant Gardner of the University of Kentucky. We have Seth Meyer of FAPRI at the University of Missouri, and we have the Chip Morgan. Wait a minute, it's Chip Flory.
Did you say Chip Morgan?
Margie called you Chip.
You wish.
Margie called you Chip Morgan earlier, and it kind of stuck. I like it. Maybe your new name. Okay, so Grant, before we get started, give us a little bit of your background, because I know you've been all across the country, at different universities. Now you're at the University of Kentucky, but how did you get there?
Yeah, so I grew up on a corn and soybean operation in southern Indiana. Went to Purdue, and I liked what I saw. I never thought I'd want to be a professor, but I thought the idea of teaching agriculture and then not a high school salary would be great. And so I just kept going to school. Wound up at the University of Nebraska, and then Kansas State University, and then hired at University of Kentucky. So all across the Midwest, and Kentucky's kind of the Midwest.
We'll count it as the Midwest today. We really appreciate you joining us today to talk about the Ag Economists Monthly Monitor. We also have Seth Meyer, and I mentioned he's the director at FAPRI at University of Missouri. But for the past 5 years, so up until January 1st, he was the chief economist for USDA. And so we have some topics, as I alluded to earlier, that we want to ask you about, and Seth is willing to talk about those. So Seth, give us a little bit of your background.
Iowan, went to Iowa State University for my master's degree, where I worked for John Lawrence and Robert Wisner, the two, at the time, livestock and grain extension economists. Worked at FAPRI at the University of Missouri. I ran the group in one of my stints at USDA that does the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, which were released today, and we've talked about. Went home, said I was never going to go back to DC, and then Secretary Perdue offered a chance to be chief economist, and I went back for 5 years, and now I'm home back in Missouri.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And Chip Flory,
Yes.
A lot of people know who you are, but give us a little bit of your background. How long have you been in the business?
38 years now. I've been at Farm Journal or Pro Farmer. Futures World News is where it started, or actually Iowa State University. If I count the years that I was the farm director at WOI at Iowa State, this would be my 40th year in the business.
Wow.
And when I was there working for Extension, every Friday afternoon, I got to go in and have a conversation with Bob Wisner and John Lawrence about what was going on in the market.
Absolutely.
At the time, Seth, I thought, geez, I got to go get this done. 40 years later, I look back at it and say, oh my gosh, look at that opportunity that I had. Pretty incredible stuff.
There's a lot of wisdom on this panel, and that's what we're going to need today. And so as we unveil a look at January Ag Economists Monthly Monitor, and this goes back to a few years ago, the Wall Street Journal was surveying economists across the country, asking things about, are we going to see a recession, things like that. I saw it in the Wall Street Journal and thought, we have some of the best ag economists across the country that we talk to all the time. Why don't we do something similar that focuses just on agriculture? So that's exactly what we did. Every month we survey about 70 ag economists from across the country. But what we wanted to do for this, to really compare things and get a boots on the ground view of what's happening in agriculture right now, is we decided not only do we need to survey economists this month, we need to also survey producers. And not only do we need to survey producers, but we also need to survey retailers and then compare those results to see how opinions differ and how opinions align right now with the ag economy. And so if we want to pull up kind of the look at the latest results from the Ag Economists Monthly Monitor, I will say the headline of this month's survey is there's a crisis of confidence. There's a crisis of confidence in USDA data. There's a crisis of confidence in, is this administration going to be able to turn things around for agriculture? And there's a crisis in confidence, is Congress going to pass things that's really going to help us on the domestic demand front? And so there's 5 key themes that I will outline real quick before we get into things, and I'm going to get their reaction, okay? And we have some nice graphics to paint the picture so it's not just all numbers right before as we head into dinner and our evening activities. But while there's a crisis in confidence, there is an overall confidence in farmers' ability to navigate the overwhelming pressures of the ag economy. And I think that's reassuring, okay? We know things are challenging, but there's confidence in each and every one of you that you're going to figure out the tools needed to weather this storm. But there's a big divide in policy Policy divide on what it will take to get the ag economy back on track. As I mentioned earlier, there's a universal collapse of the trust of USDA data, which we're going to ask about. There's waning political confidence to improve agriculture, and there's a massive federal aid gap. Not only in what economists and producers and retailers, how much additional federal aid they think it is going to take to stabilize this ag economy, but there's also some question marks about how this aid is influencing acreage decisions for 2026. And so we're gonna get into all of that. But I'll start off with this slide. Every month we ask this question: is the crops sector of agriculture currently in a recession? And for those of you that don't follow the Ag Economists Monthly Monitor on a monthly basis, you're probably asking, why aren't 100% of economists or producers or retailers saying that the crop side of agriculture is currently in a recession? Grant, you read through the responses every single month, and there seems like there's one resounding answer on why everyone doesn't think that we are in a recession currently in agriculture. But what would you say?
I mean, as we look back, and I think my first interview with Chip was a year and a half ago, probably, and I think 30%, probably less, economists were saying that we were in a recession, and that's grown over time. And a lot of that started with, what is the definition of a recession? We knew we were having a down year, but it takes two, it takes three, and I think as we've moved into this period to where we've had 2 down years, and next year, I think looks a little bit better than last year, it still doesn't look great. And so I think we're seeing that flip as people have looked forward and said, yep, this is definitely a recession, because it's probably not going to turn around real quickly.
Well, Seth, a lot of economists that I read the responses, they say the reason that I would not classify U.S. agriculture currently in a recession is land values.
No, absolutely, and that's when I was at USDA and we had producers come and we'd have a debate, a discussion. You know, what indicators do you see to indicate a recession? And I'd always ask them, well, then why are land prices rising? Why are land prices up and not down if we're in a... And I think it's a very tricky question. I think we can talk a lot about policy intervention and other things that are causing that to happen. But you're absolutely right.
I mean, Chip, that is the resounding response we get.
Oh, yeah.
When
And
you
it
see
should be.
this, what goes through your mind?
Yeah, well, like Seth said, land is where agriculture stores its wealth. That's the financial cushion that is in place out there in agriculture. And as long as that holds up, we stop a banking crisis. And as long as we can stop a banking crisis, we can stop what happened in the 1980s. There's been a lot of safeguards that are put in place to prevent that. But when I look at this 75%, I'll do the average real quick for everybody here, but it's about 75%, that believe that row crop agriculture is in recession. Keep it in mind, recession doesn't happen in a hurry. Yeah, people describe it as a train wreck, but if it's a train wreck, it's a train wreck in slow motion. It takes, to Grant's point, it takes a while to get there, and recession is a backwards-looking description. It's not forward-looking.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it just takes a while before you can finally say that, yeah, row crop agriculture is in a recession. And I say it is. My answer has been yes, it is in a recession. And the reason for that is because you put 2 years back to back in negative returns, declining net farm income. You add a third year to it, now that feels like a recession.
Not just declining net farm income, but we saw USDA just last week revise its come out with the first net farm income forecast for 2026, but the biggest surprise was really the revision to 2025, and I don't think that's a big surprise to any of you on this stage. But then we asked the question, will the current environment accelerate consolidation in row crop operations? I don't think it's a surprise that 72% of economists say yes, 67% of producers agree, and then there's 80% of retailers. This is not the high, though, Chip.
No.
When we ask this question every single month, there's one-off questions, and then there's questions we ask every single month. The past several months, this response has been 92% say yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the point that we're at right now, retailers leading the way at 80%, it's because the retailers have been here. They've done this. They are experiencing it at a level that even producers are not experiencing it. I think the reason that this is starting to back off is because of the way that the question is asked. Will it accelerate? What if we ask the question, has it accelerated? And it might be different.
Yeah, and I will say, we also ask, we asked a question about, how do you think conditions are today versus like a year ago or a month ago? And 76% of economists did say that conditions are worse today than they were a year ago. But the question we asked this month, this was the first time we asked this question, do producers have the business skills to navigate the economic challenges that are coming? So not just looking at the challenges today, but expecting these challenges to continue. And I mean, and 80% of economists say yes, 78% of producers responded that way, 62% of retailers said they were a little bit lower. But Seth, what does this tell you?
I think, what does it tell you? Well, I think it's that, at least as a non-producer, I have confidence that folks will be able to work their way through this and make some decisions necessary. Now, it goes back to me, part of me, to this consolidation question as well, too. Has it accelerated consolidation? I think the current conditions probably have accelerated consolidation. I think that those folks, there will be, and we will see folks come out of this in a better position, in a strong position, but it's going to be rough. And so I guess I'm not saying, I'd agree with the 80% of economists, but saying, this isn't going to be easy. I'm not saying this is easy and your business skills are you're going to allow you just to breeze through this, just that I have confidence both in the producers and the systems that support them to help them navigate it.
There's some good stuff coming up. And one of the questions that we asked this much is how much additional federal aid will be needed in 2026, okay? This is additional. So this is in addition to the farmer bridge payments that we already saw. And if you look, the top question that we asked, and I guess originally if I would have known we were going to ask producers, I would have made the number even bigger. But the biggest option that they had was $20 billion plus. And over half of producers say we need more than $20 billion in additional federal aid to, at least stabilize this ag economy. Grant, it seems like right now, I mean, what's the top end of this? We don't know because we just said 20 billion plus, but I think no matter how big we would have asked, that was probably what the majority of producers would have responded. What'd you say, Chip?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, Grant.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that, I think there's a lot of people that are trying to cover debt. And so a lot of that is you go through 22, 23, you save up, 24, you spend some of what you saved up, and then 25, you lose everything that's left. And so looking forward to next year, we're thinking, how am I going to get that marketing loan? How am I going to get my operating note? How am I going to pay for anything? And so when you're in that stress of a financial situation, you're always going to pick more dollars. That said, my question there would be, how much does this exacerbate or prolong the situation? And the fact of, I don't think probably one of the questions that's coming up is, what's the impact of these payments, and is it going to fix the economy? I don't think this is where the fixes come from. I think we've got to look for supply and demand levers, and that's what's really going to turn this around long term.
Chip, I've got a question for you, Seth, but Chip, 28% of economists say none.
It's kind of tough love right there, isn't it? 28%. I think they might be looking at it because you've got payments coming on ECAP. Now, this is how much additional federal aid. What's the estimate right now on what federal aid is going to be in 2026? 44 billion?
Yeah.
So how much more additional aid is needed? If we're already at 44 billion, now that's ECAP, that's SDRP, that's
FBA, ARC PLC,
Bridge,
yep.
ARC PLC, the ARC and PLC payments come in October. So that's a long ways away from, it feels like it's a long ways away from being something. But here we are, we're already at 44 billion. I think the reason that some of the economists are saying none is because we already are at 44 billion, and you and I were dropping names earlier. I'm going to drop another one. Carl Zuloff from Ohio State, Econ Emeritus, when he was on the show earlier this year talking about monitor results, and he basically just said, listen, hey, you want to talk about something that'll keep us in the valley, of the ag economy for a longer period of time because input prices are so high. Just keep these federal dollars going because he calls it a flow-through from federal government to the input.
Yep, and I'm thinking some of those unintended consequences that probably is impacting economists' decisions. Yes.
I have to, and I'll give some sympathy to my economist friends there as well too. I think that the dollars that have already flown is also what flows through some of the earlier questions we were talking about. Why are land prices high?
Yes.
Are we accelerating or blunting consolidation? When we've gone through when you go through 20, 21, 22 and prices are high, you have very little consolidation.
Right.
You've built up that consolidation. When you put that money out there, is that also having an effect on folks' view about consolidation? So to me, it's that money which runs through all of these discussions. Yeah.
But that's why we ask the question, ad hoc farm payments are, and as you can see, the majority of economists, the majority of producers, the majority of retailers, that is a Band-Aid solution that will not fix farming's financial problem. In fact, there are some economists that say, listen, it makes the situation worse, which you were talking about. Seth, you were at USDA as the chief economist for 5 years. You watched the ups and downs and the cycles. I know Secretary Rollins came to you and said, listen, we need to figure out if we have this trade war, we need to figure out what type of payment we could provide producers that would help soften the blow of a trade war. But you said these farmer bridge payments, they were not tariff aid payments. What were they?
So it's pure economic aid. I mean, if we were going to do this based upon trade, then, and I'm not picking on my rice folks out there, but we don't trade rice with China. If this was pure trade aid, there wouldn't be a rice payment. This is economic aid. You've got simultaneous folks being impacted by trade and a general poor ag economy on the row crop side. So this was meant to be economic aid delivered in a very quick fashion. But again, I think you're using the same formula that you were using in ECAP, basically.
Yep.
Now you've got FBA.
Yep.
Now you're talking about giving away some more money under this program. Is this starting to influence people's acreage decisions? And that's where I think economists get uncomfortable, which is, okay, are we fixing the problem or are we continuing the problem? Yeah. Clearly there's an issue with the farm economy, but concerns about delivery as well.
Well, and we asked the question one month, do you think this federal aid, does it keep input prices high? 100% of economists said absolutely it keeps input prices high. Now, I had some frustrated readers that said, well, Tyne, if we didn't have the payments, what? Are input prices going to go down? Okay, that is a very valid point. It's not like we would see input prices go down. But does this support input prices and not fix the longer term problem? But let's go into now, what is the one change that would move U.S. row crops from government support to market-driven profitability? And the reason we ask this question is because this is what USDA has said. USDA has said we have got to get away from relying on these government payments, yet we're seeing these government payments announced. We've got to get away from these government payments and really find new avenues for demand. Seth, in your mind, what could those avenues be?
So I think if we're talking short-run effects, I'm going to agree with the economist in terms of new domestic uses. If I'm thinking about short-run, what can you do today? There are very few policy levers which have an effect in the near term, this crop, next crop. And I think that some of the discussion in biofuel policies is one of the few policy levers that the government can throw that can have a more immediate effect. And the lower input costs, again, economist, I'm not much of an interventionist. I don't really see how you force that to happen. And expanding export markets and trade is something that, again, takes probably more than this season and next.
Yeah, and I guess to add on that, I think, if you look at those two new domestic uses and expanded world trade, both of those are on the supply side. And so I've got a good graph that shows that with new crush expansion, within 3 to 4 years, as long as we keep some semblance of the trade we currently have, our stocks are going to get really tight. That's going to push soybean price up, and then everything else is going to follow, because then the rotation game brings the corn price up. Corn's going to have to buy acres back. And so from the supply side, that's what I see actually happening. So it's not just one, we've got to have both of them together, and we can't have trade completely fall off a cliff.
Yeah. So when I saw these results,
Yeah.
one of the thoughts I had was, how do you expect input costs to go down when we're planting 100 million acres of corn? To Grant's point, beans have got to find a way to compete for acres. If beans don't find a way to compete for acres, we're not going to plant 95 million. We're going to plant 97 million again this year, 98 million again this year, something like that. Beans have got to compete for those acres. And if we're even at 95 million acres of corn, which seems to be kind of the consensus where people are settling in right now, even at 95 million, that's bringing enough demand for the inputs that it takes to grow a corn crop. We're not going to see input prices go down. We got to figure out some way to bring more supply, and maybe that's get rid of the trade tariffs. Let's get rid of some of those barriers and open it up.
I mean, and you saw, when we eliminated some of the reciprocal tariffs for countries that on MAP and DAP, you saw, and it was 10%, you saw MAP and DAP prices moderate by near 10% in a pretty quick fashion. So, I mean, there are levers on the input side. I'm not sure how many there are or the immediate effect, but there are some.
Yeah.
Well, and it's clear this is what producers want to see immediate action on. They want to see lower input prices, and just a reminder that this is the biggest pain point today.
Now, one last point on that, and I meant to make it. See, the economists are looking at it and saying, let's get the biofuels policy going through, specifically the bio-based diesel RVO at 5.6, so that beans can compete for acres in the year ahead, maybe even get that corn acreage number down to 94, 93 and a half, something like that. Now all of a sudden we're starting to put some pressure on the demand for those inputs.
So we also asked the question following up.
No?
Oh.
No, I'm with you. There's a lot of horse trading going on about these different. You got an RVO that was very aggressive, that was announced as the prelim rule.
Yeah.
I've heard no discussion about making it more aggressive, but I've heard a lot of discussion about trimming around quantities, trimming around half RIN credits, trimming around small refinery exemptions, trading all of that off for E15. I've heard a lot of horse trading.
5.6 feels like a be careful what you ask for number.
Yeah.
Are we sure that we can feed a 5.6 RVO?
But haven't we proven that in the past?
No.
But we were above 5 billion. Weren't we above 5 in 2023?
No, 3.5.
Or 2024?
Yeah. It's quite aggressive. It is very aggressive, and there's
Now, the industry can do it because right now the industry, the bio-based refining industry is running 65% capacity, something like that. They're just waiting to flip the switch once we get final confirmation. So we can push hard and we can get there. It's not like we got to start building new plants. We just need to get confidence, back to your original point, we got to get confidence back in the system that the incentives will be there so that we can ramp up the capacity at the plants.
Listen, I think they would like to have a chance to prove it. Grant, you've done some numbers. Do you think we can meet that big of a number?
I mean, I think,
bio-based diesel?
I mean, put it in place, we'll hit it. I mean, I think
He's confident.
if there's demand, we can supply it. And do we want it to turn around quickly? I think that'd be our best bet in the short term.
All right, well, we followed up in asking the question, will government policy influence acreage decisions? And I'm not going to spend much time on this because the majority say yes. Government policy is influencing acreage decisions. So then we followed up and asked, which crop does government policy favor? Overwhelmingly, it's corn. Seth?
I mean,
I'm not asking you just to take in these numbers. I'm asking you to comment here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do, and we economists are probably more concerned about some of these effects. I'm surprised not every economist said that this is affecting planning decisions. I'm not saying a lot, I'm not saying how, but I'm not surprised not every economist said so. When you simply put out a policy twice in a row, ECAP, FBA, and you have certain ratios of corn to beans, does that influence it? Or you have a rice payment, does that influence those outcomes? So I think anytime you do that, you are favoring one crop over another.
Okay, you mentioned the MFPs. What is the bridge payment? Is it a trade payment? Is it financial aid? What is it? It's financial aid, because if you go back to the MFPs, what was it? It was a penny a bushel on corn? Can you imagine if they would have done that to a corn producer this time around? Oh, holy smokes. So you look at this and you look at the way that ECAP and some of the other payments are now handled, it's much more equitable. Therefore, it's providing more support for corn. Poor wheat guys.
But Seth,
Give them some love.
we need to get, because we really need to get into USDA data and the confidence in USDA data. But when you were at USDA, did you have these conversations of some of these unintended consequences and the decisions that are made at USDA, how it could favor one crop over the other as far as planting decisions?
Yeah, so, but the world is not all economics. Policy is not all economics. Let's be fair about that, right?
That is exactly right.
And so you have to be able to get some vehicle completed and done out the door and not have regional disagreements. And so, yeah, we can talk about the economics of what's going on to no end, but that's only one fraction of what somebody has to decide on. People that make decisions, not economists.
Somebody commented and said, my bridge payment was what I got in 1985 to 1986, was the comment that just came in. Okay, which biofuel policy could most impact farm revenue in 2026? And we've talked about this a bit, so I won't spend much time on this. But retailers are really optimistic about E15, and I don't know if it's because just the recent news cycle and there's been so much talk about E15, but then we have more economists that are in the camp of, okay, we really need to max out these RVOs. Grant, I mean, is that the camp that you're in, Grant?
I am in that camp. That is what I filled out on the survey. And I think, short term, if we max out those RVOs, we've got to hit them. And that boosts demand from the crush side. And again, I think part of what pulls us out is the crush industry.
It's back to what you said at the very start. It's all about the confidence. You got to give the refiners the confidence to go forward, and that's what does it.
Well, there used to be a lot of confidence in SAF. I mean, a few years ago, that's what we were talking about here
Yeah,
at Top
but it takes
Producers
more
Summit,
time.
and that has waned.
It just takes more time. The reason that E15 isn't higher is because it takes time to move that needle. We finally got to an 11% blend rate in October. It takes a lot to move that needle, so it takes more time. You want immediate action, what could impact revenue in 2026? Max out the RVOs.
If I was going to rank them, I'd go max out RVOs, E15, 45Z's longer term, and SAF is even longer term.
For E15 at the moment is a with an RVO that's binding, it is a trade-off between corn and beans. And so as an economist, I think E15 is good, longer run, but not 26. If you have more ethanol use, you have less biodiesel use by design of the RVO.
Yep.
And so maxing out the RVO is an actual quantitative change, which can be in effect for 26. I'm not saying E15 is good or bad. I'm saying it is a trade-off in 26.
I'm with you.
It is a demand you need in the longer run.
But there's one thing that can tweak this just a little bit. If we can get past those last couple of hurdles and start selling E15 in California, they'll buy it. And those facilities out there can handle it. Getting past those two hurdles that are left in California is maybe more important than nationwide.
The slide
I hate to say it like that, but it could be.
The slide I skipped over was about, what is the biggest hurdle for profitability in 2026, and input prices are number one across the board. But let's get into this, because we asked the question, or made the statement, I remain confident in USDA data in 2026. Look at the nose, okay? And we had a question that came in earlier. This was during our marketing roundtable discussion, and I said that we would be talking about this later, but Seth, it was the question of what are your opinions on the internal review announced of USDA and its processes and procedures in light of the huge acreage change in the last report. The market trades that data, and how accurate is it? And I think the biggest question for producers in the room is, how do we see such a drastic change in a short amount of time in acreage data from USDA?
Yeah, so quite honestly, I think this is a problem. I don't necessarily disagree. I think we have to look back and say why. And I do get a little concerned when I say, why don't people have confidence? Clearly, we can get into all the details you want. A June acreage miss, I think there's a lot of the origin of this is the June acreage, the June acreage miss. But I think the important things that folks need to know is, one, when you think about if you've lost confidence, it is not that these people have a political agenda. It is not at all that the staff that do this have a political agenda. They work for me. They do not. We can talk about whether it's producer fatigue amongst a survey. I mean, these people get asked questions all the time. Survey fatigue is a real thing. I think that USDA needs to make sure that they make the value proposition to producers and get that survey taken more seriously. But they've got to prove its worth. That's on them. It's just like an input supplier. If I'm going to sell you something that I say is helpful to you, I've got to prove to you that it's helpful.
Right.
So, we can talk about lots of the origins here. I think it is a good idea that the deputy secretary and he and I had the conversation before I left that increasing transparency, engaging producers. We need producers for this. It is important that it is a partnership, and that means USDA has to prove the value proposition. If we want to talk about the origins of the miss, we can talk about that as well, too. But June acreage was the big miss.
Well, I think from origins of the miss, the way I look at it is we don't know what's in silage every year. And if you're in some of those northern states that plant a lot of silage, they had great yields. We're in a down economy. Are you going to really cut it for silage, or are you going to go ahead and harvest it and take $3.50 per bushel on what was there?
Right.
But there's two elements to that, right? There's the planted acreage miss.
Yep.
And the planted acreage miss led to the harvested acreage miss.
Right.
They are not unrelated. And then I think you have some things like September carryout stocks.
Yep.
And so that's unrelated, but made the crop supplies bigger. And you had several things here in a row that all moved the crop, some related, that all ended up with the crop bigger.
That September acreage adjustment gave me a better understanding of how misunderstood the process and the information is by producers. I couldn't believe how many people were saying, they know what the number is, we certify the acres.
Yeah.
You certify planted acres, not harvested acres. And harvested acres is where the big change is.
So there was a question or a comment that came in. If producers have to verify their acres with the FSA office, why doesn't the USDA use those numbers?
They absolutely do. And they do it now. They used to not do it until October. And now they've moved it up September, and now they've moved it into August. And so, I saw a news story today that really pinned this on FSA in terms of FSA data collection. I don't agree with that. I think that those data came in, and if anything, those data are being used better now than they were 4 years ago. Yeah. As a matter of fact, 4 years ago, you wouldn't have found out about the June acreage miss until October.
Right.
And so it's not a good thing. Doesn't mean it still wasn't a miss, but it isn't. This isn't a focus on the FSA staff and FSA data.
No, not at all. And the fact that they make the certified acreage data available middle of August adds to the transparency. One of the reasons that USDA is using it now in August is because the private industry did a great job of looking at that FSA data and going, planted acres are right here.
Yep.
We know what it is.
And it's better than it used to be. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. And we would work on, and then there was some confusion about the FSA data would be posted at a different time. We said there's no confusion. We have access to all that data. We're going to release it all at the same time, so there's not some implication about the data being out of date.
There's a question that came in about satellite data. We know that fewer farmers, and I know we've got to wrap up here shortly. We know fewer farmers are filling out the survey, but it is 2026. There has to be other tools available. So the question came in, what about satellite data? That's been around for 10 plus years. Is it being used at all? I know you guys have had these conversations.
Yes.
When you were at USDA, you had these conversations internally.
So overseas, we have to use satellite data because we didn't have access to NAS-style data. There is not yet an Earth observation solution that I would give up my NAS field level survey data. It just doesn't exist. For years, the Earth observation folks promised that it could slice and butter your bread. And it is only now that maybe that is coming closer to being reality. But I'm going to want to watch it for 10 years where they both slice and butter my bread and I compare it to my field level surveys before I have confidence in it. Can I get close with Earth's observation? Yes. But there is a if you lose survey quality, it doesn't mean that the value slowly declines. There's a break point where once you reach some threshold, that report no longer has value. And I'm not to the point where Earth observation is a replacement.
In 10 years, the guys that are using satellite data, if they're honest with themselves, they're going to get their results and say, I still feel like we ought to go out there and take a look. Just to confirm it. You got to ground truth.
Yeah.
You got to ground truth it.
But Grant,
Believe me, I know.
when we see USDA this week say they are going to do an internal review, as an economist, knowing that this is the best data that we have, will that restore confidence in you? And I'm not saying you responded that you're not confident in USDA data, but do you feel like that will restore confidence in the process that USDA uses today?
I think some. I think from the economist perspective, it wasn't as much, is this the best data we have? It was, look at all the cuts that have gone through the government recently. Do we have the best people in place? And I think that's where it came at from the economist perspective. From the producer's perspective, I think that's very different. That's why did we add 500,000 acres in January? We should have known this was out here. And so I think it's going to recover some of the damage. I don't think they're going to find much because I think they're doing the best they can. 100%. It's the best estimates out there. Follow it because you're not getting any better. But I do think it'll help some.
There's a little bit of garbage in the data that comes in. If you get a little bit of garbage in the data that comes in, and I know that there are filters in place on that, but if there is some garbage coming in, there's going to be a little bit of garbage in the numbers going out. On surveys.
Seth, real quick, before we move on and close things, is there anything you want to add to the survey piece of it, the farmer survey piece of it?
This is an important partnership. USDA has to prove its value proposition to the producers. They have to know that that they have to prove that value, that this is good for producers, to add some symmetry, information in the market, symmetry of information, and USDA has to prove it. These folks want to do this well. I hated being wrong, hated it, and so they want to do a good job, and so I expect that this will be a good process.
Chip and everybody, to wrap things up, I mean, I go back to the original, there was a crisis in confidence, and we've seen that across the board. There's some hope that maybe when it comes to biofuel policy, there is a divide on what will take to get the ag economy back on track, but at least there's some hope there. There's some hope when it comes to biofuel policy, and there are some options that maybe something like that can help turn things around. But there was also confidence in farmers' ability to navigate the pressures in the ag economy. And so really, as we look into 2026 and what it's going to take, I want to ask each of you, are you confident that producers will have the ability to overcome the challenges in 2026? And what do you think is the most valuable tool available today to help them do that?
Okay. You want me to go?
I'll buy you a drink after this, Chip.
With the changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill to crop insurance, I don't know how you don't go full out. I mean, that's an important tool. And in the environment that we're in, with the assistance that is provided on that coverage, to me, that's number one. And I think farmers understand that, and I think that's why farmers have got the business skills to navigate this. Now, there are some that will argue that just prolongs problems. So, but I think that's tool number one.
No, I like that. I mean, in terms of what tools are available to you, we
Yeah.
can argue whether or not they're distortive or whether these are good,
Right.
solid solutions. But I think that absolutely making use of those tools which are in front of you, us economists are not known for our optimism, so I'll just put this out there as well too. I don't think big policy is done well in an environment in an environment of panic or short-run gain. And so I think we get into these cycles of making policy adjustments or making payments in the short run because we got a crisis now, and when we get that price spike, and somebody gets their drought, Dan Bassey,
Yeah.
then people forget about this when really I think that there is probably some underlying tweaks in policy overall that could be made.
Well, and I think we're at a crossroads, and so you're either going to fight through this and get to where things turn around, and I think the people that make it through that, they've got some great years ahead. There's also going to be some people that are near the end of their career, and it may be strategic to step out. And I think it's important to remember that if you're at that space, you've built a multi-million-dollar business. And if anybody built a multi-million-dollar business that wasn't a failure, that's a success.
Yeah.
And so just knowing your time and knowing strategically what's best for me, what's best for my family, and what's best for my operation moving forward, and then moving from there. And if you fight through it, I think profitability is going to be there. It's just getting through these down years. We've done it before, and we'll do it again.
Grant, Seth,
Really good.
Chip, thank you all for joining us. Let's give them a round of applause. We appreciate it.